So the topic of this webinar today is the future of the EU taxonomy, the European Union taxonomy. Usability, clarity, and credibility are the subtitles we've used, and I'll come back to what in the world we mean by that in a couple of seconds. We have a number of speakers with us joining. I will introduce them all in a minute, but let me just give you a few words by way of introduction, if I may. We have had an extraordinary achievement in the last few years in the context of the extraordinary challenges we face. Before I go to the achievement, I do want to remind you of the challenges. With their Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with AR6 and a new report just a couple of days ago, which, frankly makes for terrifying reading. It says that on our current trajectory of emissions growth or emissions globally, we are facing catastrophic consequences, unimaginably catastrophic consequences. To avoid those catastrophic consequences, we need what can only be called a U-turn in terms of emissions around the world, a very sharp reduction in the very near future. They have originally been saying 55% global cuts by 2030. The new IPCC report says 60% by 2035. This is in a very short amount of time. And this isn't a target. Let me be very clear. This is a minimum we need to achieve to avoid that pathway to catastrophic climate change, which is complicated, compounded by feedback loops that start kicking in once we get above a certain point. In other words, it's not a matter that we can just delay it a bit and good. If we miss this particular minimum requirement, we miss the chance, the window to have an impact on our global climate change trajectories. The IPCC says 3 billion people are now classed as being vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Not 3 million, but 3 billion. That's 40% of the world's population. That's a very substantial impact. And of course, what does that mean? Well, it certainly means floods like in Pakistan last year, heat in Sichuan, pandemics rooted in destruction of the environment as a result of climate change and human activity. All sorts of things we can go on about them. So they're the stakes. In the context of those stakes, we've had a few wins in the last few years. One of the wins is that governments have begun to accept what the scientists have been telling us, frankly, for 30 years about what needs to be done. We saw a couple of years ago, Europe and then a bunch of countries of the President Biden Climate Summit commit to strong 2030, as well as 2050, 2060 and 2070 emissions reduction targets. I mean, of course, committing is not doing them yet, but at least the transition has begun. That's a win. Are they ambitious enough? Probably not. We've got to keep reviewing them, but it's a very good start. We've also seen the growth of engagement by investors, by regulators and central banks, by the whole financial sector in this idea of green finance, sustainable finance. We've seen in the area climate bonds working in the rapid growth of green and social and sustainable bonds. That overall market is around $3.5 trillion now. It was 3 billion when we started some 12 or 13 years ago. The Network for Greening the Financial System is an association of 120 plus central banks working on addressing climate change and the systemic risks to our financial system, and so on. And in Europe, something that has made me very proud as a European citizen has been the development of the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, launched in 2018, continuing to be executed. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm always wanting the Commission to do more. I'm always wanting member states to do more. But at least we've got change. At least we've got significance. And one of those things has been the European Union taxonomy. This is a concept. Look, I'm going to say quite frankly, climate bonds started this idea in 2012 and 2013. We managed to convince the Chinese government, the Central Bank of China, to institute a Chinese taxonomy in 2015 to guide the growth of the green bonds market. A commission I was a member of called the High-Level Expert Group on Sustainable Finance in 2017 recommended the European Union, and to my delight, to my thrill, the commission decided it was a good idea to pursue this idea. The European Taxonomy is now an act of Parliament. Is it perfect? No. Is it useful and powerful? Yes. Every single financial institution that I've come across in Europe is looking at the taxonomy because under the Europe's disclosure regulations, you would have come across these acronyms, SFDR and CSRD. There are more. It's horrible. But nevertheless, the disclosure regulations governing the financial sector, banks, corporates, and investors, taxonomy is a baseline tool to determine what to disclose, a common language across Europe in a way that we haven't seen in relation to sustainable finance investments. And you can see the alternative when you look at what it's called the environmental, social, and governance market, where every consultant has a different methodology. My friend Pavan Sukhdev showed me a wonderful chart recently where he compared the placement of the top 100 companies in the S&P index in one company's ESG table compared to another company's ESG table, and there was no correlation. And you're sort of thinking, the ESG world is tricky. Now, of course, there's work underway to try and standardize that. But in the meantime, we've leapfrogged past that idea when it comes to climate and instituted a taxonomy, a lexicon of sustainable investments in Europe, which has been, again, to my incredible excitement, been adopted around the world now. We have some 30 countries either having instituted or working on taxonomies that are triggered, inspired, derivative of the European Union taxonomy. Of course, there are differences. There are challenges. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But this is a big win. And the key thing about the taxonomy is the term inserted in the principles right at the beginning, science-based. This is not about what we think we can do, at least in the principles under debate. This is about what the science tells us we need to do, and then we have to figure out how we do it. Change the order around a little bit. So that's a win. I keep saying nothing's perfect. We're not quite there yet. There is still work to be done to improve it. For that, I want to invite my panelists to join me today. We have a great group. We will have, in a little while, a few words from Karen Leonard from the Erste Bank, who is working in ESG and climate finance and has been implementing the taxonomy in Erste Bank and has got a first-hand view of other banks, institutions in the Central European area and how they're doing it. This is practical, real experience. I'm a bit scared to hear what she's going to say. I'm going to say, but we're going to get there in a minute because, of course, she's having to do the hard work. We will hear in a minute from Nadia Humphreys, who is the Bloomberg LLP sustainable finance guru, who is also the former co-rapporteur of the platform Sustainable Finance. She and I served on this for a while, looking at usability. And she's an observer in the new platform of Sustainable Finance as well, of which I'm a member as well. And we're going to hear from Bridget Bull, who's the Climate Bond Director of Technical Services, our own taxonomy guru, who's been working on taxonomies all around the world, Singapore, Vietnam, India, and so on. So she'll give us a bit of a global perspective on all these issues. But to kick us off, I'd like to invite one of I'm going to say my favorite MEP, Sirpa Pietikäinen. Favorite because she has been such a champion of the need to address climate change for so long and continues, probably since she was a Minister of Environment in Finland in the early 90s. She's been across this issue for a long, long time. She's been an incredible activist. She was also the person who helped drive the taxonomy through the European Parliament. I'm sure she'll talk about that in a minute. She's been involved in international parliamentary associations pushing the issue of climate change, a continual, a perennial activist. Sirpa, we're thrilled to have you with us today. I'd like to invite you just to make some initial comments to get us going about taxonomy, its importance, its potential role in Europe, your reflections. Over to you.
Thank you, Jean, so much for your kind words. And yes, if something labels me and describes me almost more than my gender, that is the taxonomy and sustainable finance. So wherever that is thought, I'll discussed and talked, I'll try to fit myself in. And I'm very delighted to be in a group of such experienced audience, and always in these kind of climates. I do learn more than what I can give, but this is the creative, collective creativity, what we actually need nowadays to survive. Well, I don't know if you have checked the latest IPCC report, but it is pretty gloom picture what it gives to us. I can just very quickly show you the figures. The red is where we are going, and the greenish is the promised 2, and the blue is 1.5. And you don't need to go in details to understand that we are in peril, just to put it briefly. So my first advice is that always when you have the choice to listen science or politicians, listen to science, not the politicians. And this is some parts in the taxonomy that I've been very disappointed, because we tried to be very careful here. And that's why throughout the taxonomy it is written that it needs to be science-based, based with indicators that are harmonized, and that the platform needs to be independent, expert body based on science-based indicators that are harmonized, that set the taxonomy. Well, we all know how the story has been going. And then sometimes I feel like that's kind of a desperate mother whose child has turned out to be a walking dead, and you can't kill it because you love it, and you can't leave it to wander around as a beast, and you really don't know what to do. But serious, because the issue is serious. I believe very strongly that the idea of the taxonomy and sustainable finance is the backbones to save the planet if anything does. I would like to take another approach here, just that you know it in the bonds, and that is the risk aversion. And I'm pretty happy of the work what happens in the ECB and in just Stability Forum and other circles in central banks to estimate what is the climate risk, and then to incorporate that risk assessment as a part of the risk assessment in insurances, in banking, in national debts, in hopefully in the future, and so on. Because having the incentive saying something is green is not enough. It's like offering you the chocolate. You might want to take it, you might not want to take it. But if someone takes 1/3 of your plate away, that increases your interest to other offerings. And we all know that these informal estimates that we have about 70 trillion euros in investment markets, and over 30 trillion of them are bound on unsustainable or sunk investments, like the fossil investments. So the trick is, how do you get that money out of there? And because you need the transition and you need to support the transition, that means that you can't sort of label that oil is all bad or shell is all bad, because you need to give the transition path for those companies who want to change their company profile and activities. So this kind of a blacklisting doesn't work, but it would need to be via the disclosure regulation that should be used in bonds as well. So avoid the risks, and in the longer run, we would need to have harmonized indicator-based understanding of the negative impacts. Then the second point, and that is never look the climate only. Even though it is disastrous, so is biodiversity, and we all know the issues with the resource efficiency. And if we look only one sector, the risk is that we end up with this kind of a palm oil or let's burn the forest solutions that seemingly would solve the one issue, but then in the longer run or even shorter run cause quite a significant biodiversity or other issues. And that's why in the taxonomy that is blended from there in other places, the do no significant harm principle is important. You can't produce solar panels with child labor and then think that you earn sustainability labeling. And this do no significant harm is the way how we actually could get in assessment the risk, the 30 billion better in the future. So the disclosure, the taxonomy are these kind of a partners, like then of course the company reporting what we have, and then the due diligence regulation, where avoiding the risk and turning to climate neutral transition by 2030 is what the parliament wanted and would be the way. Okay, globally, and then the next steps. Firstly, I'm looking very closely and hopefully the IFRS process so that we could get the hopefully the identified bits and pieces of the taxonomy and reporting on the IFRS network, and then it would have the global impact. I would look that actually taxonomy would be used and developed for the CSRD reporting and for the due diligence, because the more sort of reporting schemes you have, the more confused it gets and you lose the comparability. And this is my greatest worry with the climate bonds also. I understand that the taxonomy is not used one-to-one and it has its flaws, but I hope that we could have a bigger financial market movement and market industry movement trying to fix the taxonomy's flaws and try to integrate it, because we need to have one base, how you measure and what you measure. And then if you start looking the bonds or indexes or other assets and have different kind of indicator set there, it really does not work. And then I just leave it up to, and this is with the newest Green Bond Initiative too, it refers and uses taxonomy, well, fine, but no, it's not based and it's not one-to-one on it, nor is the company report. Then where we stand with the taxonomy and with the bonds is that the climate was quite an effort, as we all know. We didn't succeed to have anything meaningful in coal, or I mean not coal, but gas, or in nuclear. But in the other sectors, it's a basis. Or the third is the forests, where if you say that if you follow the legislation, you are sustainable. No, then you are not criminal if you follow the legislation, but it doesn't grant you the label of being a saint. And this is the problem. You never should put the taxonomy on the level of existing regulation, because that is the business as usual. And then again, it says very clearly it needs to be substantially higher than the industry average. And it doesn't mean that you put all industries together. It means the specific industry that we are talking about.
You're absolutely right, Sirpa. I'm just conscious, I'm keen to bring in the other speakers.
Yeah,
on that particular point.
my two very last comment is that now we are awaiting the last slot. That is going to be a really big fight about biodiversity, and easier ones are going to be the resource efficiency, the emissions and water, and the social that actually should be part of the bonds as well, is not to be seen coming from the Commission in this period. So that is the next. But I hope they all could be in the same regulation, not that you have social here and climate or environment here, because it would need to be the sustainability altogether. Thank you, and sorry for exceeding my time.
No, thank you so much. You're right about the social. I mean, there's a clear indication from the Commission that the social report last year, which laid a framework for doing something, won't be able to be pursued this year. It might be pursued next year. We will see. I mean, at Climate Bonds, we are working on an extension of what we'd call social from the point of view of climate resilience, expanding our taxonomy in the sense that we need to ensure our societies, not just our physical infrastructure, are resilient in the context of the climate shocks that we're starting to experience. So there's a bridge across there, but that's a developing area. We do have the Commission, we believe, bringing a new delegated act, which will look at some of the recommendations from last year's platform and adopting those. I mean, I'm expecting to see shipping and aviation. Oh, that's a bit scary for people, but we need to at least ensure that battery-operated aircraft are understood to be a critical part of the investments, and hydrogen-operated aircraft, and the same in shipping. These are part of the transitions. Now, I don't know what the detail of what the Commission Act is in terms of what they done the recommendations that were put through last year, but certainly Nadia and I supported the recommendations last year, so we're hopeful about that. Let's see. You know, the truth is that translating recommendations into legislation is a very black art, beyond my area of expertise. So we've got to see how it comes through. I'm expecting there to be a bit more emphasis on infrastructure and manufacturing of material, of kit like rail, which is relevant to the low carbon trajectory we've got in there. So everyone, that's just an expectation. We'll have to wait and see. I'm assuming the next month or so, we'll see a new delegated coming through. But the real question is, what else is on the agenda? Nadia, you were co-rapporteur of the Usability Group, and of course, co-author. I was a minor player. I think I crossed a T and dotted an I somewhere in that report last October, which looked at usability, which the platform adopted last year. Your thoughts on now directions for the EU taxonomy, and where is this going to go?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you, Sean, for referencing very much a large body of work that landed on people's laps in October last year. If any of you managed to get past page 180 plus, you would have seen some recommendations that Platform 1.0 made to Platform 2.0. And what's really comforting to see in Platform 2.0 is some of the key messages on simplification and usability, and the new data and usability group being given quite a prominent position to take that report and provide more detailed recommendations that the Commission or the ESAs would be able to take forward. Maybe to break it out, because you've got a broad audience, into like little chunks, and maybe just go back to some of the basic objectives of what the taxonomy is and how it should be used. If you bear with me, I'm just going to talk about 3 user groups. There is more than 3 user groups. I'm kind of missing out the asset owners a bit. But I just wanted to start with what are the objectives of the taxonomy, and then do we think it's meeting the objectives right now? So if I start with just a non-financial company, so I'm a manufacturer of plastics, or I'm an energy company, what I have to do at the moment is I have to report, using my financial statement, the amount of revenue or turnover, the amount of capital expenditure, and the amount of operating expenses that are aligned to the taxonomy for activities that I'm doing that are covered by the taxonomy, and not all of them are. So if we have a look at last year, and last year you only had to say, am I eligible or not? We saw about 1,300 companies so far report their eligibility. None of them had to report alignment, but actually we saw just under 50% choosing voluntarily to start reporting alignment. Now within that cohort, so those that did report alignment, sort of 90% of them said 0%. We're not there yet. So you're looking at a very small number that is aligned. And I think that speaks loudly to what Sirpa and Sean, what you were saying in the introduction. We're so far away from the pathway we need to be. For me, that is not a criticism of the taxonomy as a tool. That is a criticism of the way that we currently operate. And actually, when I see that reported, typically people are using kind of revenue or turnover figures. So are companies today operating in a way that is substantially contributing to the mitigation or adaptation objectives? Not many are. That's true. The really interesting metric for me, and as an investor, something I would be looking towards, is capital expenditure. So that says in 5 years up to 10 years time, will I be achieving something that is substantial contribution? And so focusing really on those forward indicators are critical for transition. And I think Sirpa said this really well. Fossil fuel companies have big roles to play in transitioning to renewable energy sources. They also have big roles to play if we're saying electric vehicles are the future and building out electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So where they are doing those activities, those should be encouraged and investment in them should continue. Where they are building new fossil fuel operations, I think that is a different question. And the taxonomy gives you credit for that. It doesn't say all fossil fuel companies are bad and therefore in a red camp. It says if they are doing strong activities, then that counts. So number one, I think that objective is strong. And I think some of the reporting I've seen around taxonomy and non-financial, I don't think is quite on the mark. Is the technical screening criteria difficult to kind of wade through? Yes, it is. Have we seen international companies try and do it? Yeah, we've seen companies in the US, companies in Mexico, companies in the UK and Norway that are not necessarily subject to this obligation have chosen to adopt the EU taxonomy.
Which is incredible, isn't it, really, when you think
Which is wonderful to see. Slightly problematic in certain pieces refer directly to EU legislation that they are not subject to. Do we need to do more to support those international companies who want to take on the EU taxonomy? Yes, I think we do. Should there be some more supplementary guidance? I'd love to see some more supplementary guidance. So that's maybe where I would stop there, Sean, on non-financial. I'm actually going to then just break out financial. So credit institutions, banks. A large part of Europe, if we just focus in on Europe, are small and medium-sized enterprises lending to the smaller organisations who have no obligation to report, but it is a critical financing activity. And banks want to do that in a green way. They want to encourage that lending to be future-proof. Great. So are there tools that allow a bank to consider a taxonomy way of doing it when the SME has no obligation to give that back to them? That is a place that I think is really interesting for Platform 2.0 to look into. Are there ways that we can build frameworks that are easy for banks to use that allow them to offer green lending to SMEs without the onward obligation of the SME to report?
Hang on.
Yeah.
Karen, did you hear that? Platform 2, ways of making it easy for banks. I like that phrase.
I like that very much. So I'm really looking forward.
And Karen, I won't steal your thunder on green asset ratio, but maybe one thing I would say on it at the moment, Sean, is that's meant to look at kind of the whole balance sheet of a bank and then cherry pick over time certain activities that could be marked as green. One thing I will say out now, and it's in our report, is that a fair representation of all the green activities of a bank? No, I don't think it is. Is it problematic at the moment because, for example, the denominator includes things, let's say, a derivatives and sovereign investment, where the numerator cannot at the moment include those things. So if you consider a retail bank to an investment bank, the shapes of those organizations are very different, which means that actually the investment bank is always going to look smaller because it has to put more in the denominator that it could never put into the numerator. So therefore, when I'm looking bank A to bank B, am I making a fair comparison? No, I'm kind of looking at the shape of the organisation, not the greenness of their activities. Should we do more there? I absolutely think we should. It needs to be a tool that demonstrates and incentivises a bank to do good things. Is it doing that right now? In my personal opinion, I don't think it is. And then if we come on to kind of the final, which I'm going to do is asset managers. And broadly speaking, and I'm generalizing here, but asset and investment managers act as agent. So they have an institutional investor or a retail investor that gives them a mandate and they invest their cash given that mandate. Are all mandates green? No. Would we like them to be? I'm sure Sirpa would love them to be, because then you're funneling more private capital into supporting that transition. what the legislation says at the moment is if you claim your product is sustainable in some way, then we expect you to justify it in the shape of a data disclosure. A piece of that disclosure is the taxonomy. Great. The numbers, as I said, are really small. Are they going to be challenged on why the numbers are small, and is that an awkward conversation? Maybe it is. And I don't mind that. I think it's important to say of what I'm investing in, how much of it's eligible. So in the piece of the pie, not all of the pie is invested. So healthcare, for example, or a large amount of the retail and service sector are not in the taxonomy. You may want to continue to invest in them, and there are good actors in that space. They're just not covered by the taxonomy. That's fine. But for those that are eligible, what could they be doing to be more aligned? And I would really focus here on the CapEx again, not on the turnover numbers, although you report both. Now, and this is controversial, Sean, but one thing I'm quite keen on would be something like, at the moment, we're penalising those ESG funds. And what that ultimately means is if I, as an investor, want to do something that's sustainable, I'm probably going to pay higher management fees to do that, because ultimately the asset manager has a burden of collecting data and big reporting obligations. And to some extent, they're going to pass that burden back to me, the asset owner. If we stripped away the disincentives and the higher fees and costs to do those sustainable reports, maybe one thing is just to consider taxonomy reporting on everything. Just give me that one number, the turnover and the CapEx. I don't care whether you've said your product's green or whether you've said your product's not green. Because the really interesting thing for me is, imagine I'm just investing and I'm actually more interested in financial returns. And I haven't really thought about sustainability and I don't want to pay additional management fees. So I'm happy. I start to then see, hey, Nadia, 1% of your investment is aligned to kind of a credible net zero or decarbonizing pathway, 1%. And I might be like, oh, that I don't think I like that. And even though that wasn't in my original mandate, if I see that number, I might think, can I make that number higher? Now, obviously, I can have that conversation and the asset manager can say, well, here's our greener products and they do come with higher fees. But I'm also just having the conversation saying, but in my mandate, could we do something about that number? And I think that then is a really interesting conversation fund managers could start to have with their asset owners.
That's the conversation we want.
Yes, I think. So there, I'm going to stop there, Sean, and allow other people to speak. But those would be my tidbits on usability. So
maybe, Karen, I should go to you because we'll bring you in earlier. And then I'll ask Bridget about the international perspective on this. And by the way, for our listeners, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you want to ask a question, we'll try and answer some during the course, and if not, we'll pick them up afterwards by email. Also, this webinar will be recorded and will be available on Plum Pond's website very quickly afterwards, if you need to jump off and you want to listen at the end of it. So, Karen, tell us about the experience you've had with implementation of taxonomy and your thoughts on directions, given your experiences.
Thank you for that, Sean. Thanks very much. So the taxonomy plays really a very central role in the financial banking because we are the center of the green transformation, as the European Commission always stated. And they are right. We are really in the center, especially in those of the legal requirements. But on which kind of or in which points of our value chain taxonomy hits us? And I think there are really three main areas. The first one, Nadia already mentioned, it's the financing one. So when we started with the taxonomy, and taxonomy is really, I would say it's a clever classification system. So it's really, the idea was to put in the objective criteria so that everyone knows what is sustainable or what is taxonomy aligned. And I think especially on this topic, sustainability, it's so important to have objective criteria, because always, if you have some, if you do some speeches, go on conferences, I realize this topic is so emotional, so subjective, and this is why taxonomy is so important to pull on the string and to go really. Everyone should go the same way, and for this we need the objective criteria. But
Karen, can I just say thank you for Sirpa, for Nadia, for myself, our perspective and the work we've done over the last years. Thank you for saying that. Really appreciate it. But please go ahead at the butts.
Yes, I will come later to that because in Austria you have special to be aware in some topics of taxonomy because it's so emotional. No, but first you get a shock when you see taxonomy. You have 70 economic activities, and for each part of the 70 activities you have different technical criteria. But it's logic that you have it because there are other thresholds, there are other carbon footprints and so on. So it's really necessary. So when you get over the first shock, you have to analyze your portfolio as a bank. Okay, what kind of activities are really crucial for my business? Because not every 70 boxes or activities are really important on our portfolios. So you have to make a priority list. What is important? What is in my financing area really important? And especially if you're a stock listed company as Erste Group operating not only in one country, we're operating in different countries in CEE region. It's important to say, okay, on a consolidated number, to communicate with the colleagues there. Okay, what is really relevant for you? What is so what kind of activities or what technical screening criteria have to be put or implemented firstly in the core banking systems of the bank, so the advisors get a tool to make the screening in the financing process, to say, to check, is this project we are financing, is it taxonomy aligned or is it not taxonomy aligned? This is very important.
And Karen, sorry, can I challenge you a little on that one, because I think it's really interesting. So would you see a framework where a bank is owning its assessment of a company? So a bank would look at the company and say, do I think these activities are substantially contributing? Can I see they do no harm, in the absence of the company reporting data to the bank? Is that your vision there?
Yes, this is absolutely my vision. Yes, it is. So, so the first is, so we as financial institution, maybe I give you some kind of short introduction of the mindset of a bank. So a bank always wants to be some kind of or make some leadership. So for us as Erste Group, it's very important, or our goal, our target is to become the leader on ESG in the CE region. This is why we really started very early on the ESG topic, on our strategy dialogues and discussions and so on, how to become the leadership in this kind of new area, because we have several years of experience on the social part, and now we also want to become the leaders in the environmental part.
I love that. And I think, Sean, maybe, I don't know if there are other financial institutions like Karen who want to come and speak to us in the platform and say, we have ideas of how we can make the taxonomy framework for investors useful. I think we'd love to hear from people like Karen on that topic. I think that's access to SME finance. I think that's,
yes, I will come to that later, because the very important point of our mindset is, and this is with what we are struggling at the moment, we need the kind of the reputational side, the op risk. So we need that there are so many soft laws in the topic of sustainability of the EU Green Deal. We hardly have really mandatory legal requirements such as taxonomy, SFDR, and so on. So most of them are the expectation of the authorities, of ECB, of the national authorities. And this, at the moment, it differs a little bit. So if you're operating in different countries, you always have to be aware of the national authorities and their interpretations, and the legal to make long-term plans, or also mid-term plans, and setting mid-term and long-term targets. You need a legal framework on which you can stick, and this is the problem, because at the moment there is no really stable framework, and our national authorities are already in discussion of greenwashing. So we have not started, or we're right at the start of the green transition and transformation process, and everyone is blaming us for greenwashing. Also, we have right started and are really eager to implement taxonomy very correctly in our framework. So that this is where a little bit struggling, and maybe because we are not that fast as we would need it for the Paris Agreement to stick on the 1.5 degree It's the security in planning, in long-term planning. And for that, we really need the framework, the policy framework on national and European level. And this is at the moment not so clear, or many points of interpretation. But coming back to the taxonomy, our experience, so the substantial contribution check, according to the taxonomy, this is really, how to say, yes, you have to implement it in your system, but this you can do because you really have clear criteria on that. So this is an easy job. You only have to put in the criteria, you have to implement the process for the advisors in the financing process, but also in the investment area. So this is quite easier. The point, do no significant harm, this is a little bit more complex because there are not so clear criteria. It's most of them, it's some kind of qualitative criteria in which we also have some kind of interpretation. You have to do assumptions, you have to use proxies, and here, coming back to the mindset, there's always a legal risks. There's always, you have a legal risk if you're taking proxies, assumptions, especially also the science right at the start of everything here. So now, for example, we implemented, or we signed in the PCARF and also the PACTOR for our calculation, because it's important for, we have to need science-based methodologies and implement it in there. But it's also, they're very keen but they're also in the process of developing, so it changes a lot. And you have,
Karen, can I just ask you a question on do no harm, because I agree with you. In the old TEG report that Sean and I were in, we made a proposal that do no harm would be a due diligence approach, a little bit like, Karen, anti-money laundering, right? There's no definite yes, no, there is high, medium, low risk, and you need to justify the judgment. For do no harm, can you see it lending itself to a due diligence assessment? Do you think the problem is this, you need to be 100% compliant or you're out? Is that the critical thing? So if it was due diligence, even if it had the same rules, do you think that would be more operable for you as a bank?
This is a good point you're referring to, because I think the most important point is implementing ESG, or also the analysis and assessments in existing processes. What you're referring to would be in our group the op risk, so operational risk assessment. This is definitely part in it. You can say, okay, this is low risk, this is mid risk, this is high risk. But to make this kind of decision, nevertheless, you have to make some kind of framework, okay, up to which line or to which criteria you say it is low, mid, or high risk. And what we are a little bit afraid of, so if we have quantitative criteria or quantitative factors, we're really happy, because then we can do nothing wrong. If there is some kind of interpretation, also the minimum social safeguards, this is the next topic, because this is really very, very unclear. So yes, we can ask our client, do you stick to the OECD guidelines or to UN Global Compact or whatsoever? But this is yes, no, no problem about that. But how deep should our analysis be? Is it sufficient to ask the client and say, are you a member of this? Are you a signatory of that? Are you sticking to that? Do they have a commitment on your website? But nonetheless, it's not really, what about the value chain of our client? So this is the next discussion in the CSRD and CSDDD, but you have many possibilities to fail on these points of the assessment as a bank, and then you have the legal risk. And as bank, you always want to be 100% compliant, especially towards the national authorities. And
let's come. That's a point of discussion, and I think that we need to take forward in the platform's usability conversation, because this is going to be difficult in many ways. It'll put it this way: it affects the nature of the recommendations we might make around usability adjustments to taxonomy going forward. I wanted to stress Nadia's point. Feedback. There is a feedback form in the chat. That feedback form is specifically for people who want to comment on usability and ideas for improvements. We will also be, as a platform, fanning out across Europe, talking in different organizations about usability and about the taxonomy and listening people. In my own case, for example, I'll be in Prague next week, in Warsaw, in Prague a little while after, and I'll be at Erste Bank's conference a little later this year in Vienna with Karen, with the objective of getting people to feed in suggestions for how we can improve the usability of the taxonomy. So please, everyone out there, at least get your pens ready for the feedback form that's in the chat. I'm just conscious that I'd like to bring in Bridget the international perspective, Karen, but I better just check. Have you covered enough of the challenges you faced? Is there any points you want to just cover before we move on?
I think from the national perspective, so within our region, we see that the national authorities and also the governments are really eager in implementing the EU Green Deal. Sometimes it's not that easy, but I really have to say that the whole region is really eager in implementing the EU Green Deal, especially in the CEE countries. Yes, so parts of them already reached the goal of reducing their emissions. So in the Fit for 55 plan, for sure in the CE region, it was that there had some kind of low-hanging fruits because they were closing the old industries or raising them at the level of techniques. So this was in a way quite easy for them. So they had low-hanging fruits, but nonetheless, especially on renewable energy, they're right at the start, and each country has different topics. This is very interesting. For example, we are here in Austria. In Austria, transportation, mobility, this is a huge topic because of we have a lot of traffic here in Austria and a lot of streets and so on. So this is our main topic. In CE, it's, for example, recycling, waste management, and especially the renewable energy. So the share of renewable energy is very low in the countries. And we are now trying to step in this gap and really to be ambitious to enlarge the renewable energy share in those countries by financing them.
Of course, the whole point of the taxonomy is to outline a shopping list for the future.
Exactly.
The sorts of investments that we can drive capital to. So in a sense, you're outlining the opportunities for investors, for others. That's great to hear. But Bridget, international comparison issues, you've been working on taxonomies in multiple other countries. We're referencing the EU. What are your thoughts on the future in the light of that, the future of the EU taxonomy, how to make this work globally, not just within the EU? Because after all, Europe is a global leader, a global trendsetter. We need to be having an eye outside of our borders and how we drive the global discussion.
Yeah, and I think that is key, that role of the EU taxonomy as a leader. And I wasn't involved in the TAG discussions and then the H-Leg discussions, but I have a feeling that this was underestimated, the role to which the EU taxonomy has been a leader and is being followed elsewhere around the world. And so I think with that, with leadership comes great responsibility, as they always say. And I think that is kind of where we see ourselves. So in that sense, the headlines really matter. So, the CDA headlines were disaster. We know that because everywhere else in the world, they only read the headlines are read.
You're referring to the complementary delegated act edition of taxonomy.
I'm using
last year, which talked about nuclear and gas in a complicated way. Yep.
Indeed. So in a complicated way, there were lots of caveats. All of those caveats made quite a lot of sense, but no one read the caveats, or some people did, but few people read the caveats. A lot of people read the headlines. And so I think, these kind of things are really where it's really important, to get it right for kind of the rest of the world, and that kind of responsibility, those headlines really matter. A leader in kind of granularity. So that granular approach that EU has taken, others have adopted and have a real desire to be interoperable. So I think that is the real win here. There is a huge amount of genuine kind of desirability and real need to be interoperable, to want to be aligned with the EU, but the technicalities of that is really challenging. Nadia's mentioned some of the kind of really big issues. There's lots of EU regulation, not just in do no significant harm, but also in substantial contribution criteria. When it's impossible to align, people go their own way. And so that is what you end up seeing. And so the paths diverge. And this is kind of, what we've seen around the world that is happening, and what we, there's a real need, there's a real want to align, but it's very difficult to. There's also clearly data availability issues. This has been quite well discussed. And these are, even more extreme outside of the EU, where a lot of these things are not measured. So I think that's some of the real key, is to have that kind of leadership and that guidance that's being provided in terms of that granularity. And hopefully, and so there was questions in the chat about the extent to which there'll be acceptance of other taxonomies. The very stringent way that the EU taxonomy is used, and the highly regulated approach, makes it very difficult for any kind of equivalence, or any kind of, we are in line with you, because it has to be the same as you, which is impossible. So I think that is really important, that there is a way that this kind of equivalence is felt, and that is a part of it. I know there's lots of questions coming in, so I won't go kind of into all the details from this, but I think that the last point I'll make is that around the EU as a leader, I hear time and time again from countries all around the world, we don't want to be more ambitious than the EU. So the EU is the high bar. No one will go beyond that. Very few will go beyond that. So we have to realize that as we're kind of thinking about the EU taxonomy and about kind of usability, that others are going to follow, but it might be a little less stringent, a little less robust given local circumstances. And so I think those kind of things are quite important for the next iteration of taxonomy to consider in what happens around the world and what happens next. So I'll leave it there, because I know there's lots of questions to cover, but I've got plenty of other things I can touch on.
Great point. We're working through now. Sirpa, I know you've got to jump off in a minute. So any reflections or thoughts before we lose you there? And folks, we're going to go about 10 minutes over time the way we're going, if that's okay, because we're just getting going. But Sirpa, first, any questions or reactions to the other speakers before we move ahead? Still on mute.
Let me unmute myself. Very valuable and good thoughts. I appreciate highly this aspect that yes, EU is, and it should be the leader, hopefully with UK, in sustainable finance and in the taxonomy. So it is our responsibility to shoulder that as well, not to expect that someone else is going to do the job for us. Then how to make it more global. I hope that we all, from our different sources, could push the World Economic Forum, for example, to have this kind of a sustainable finance special, not only one session, but a section or something, try to bring all the different forces together. And then the data is the most relevant and important. And I've been proposing that we should have a data collection in the UN, United Nations Statistical Authority, and in European Statistical Authority. That has, a bit like IFRS, has the different figures and forms how to calculate and what is the return on investment and that worth, about the CO2 footprint, so that it is the whole life cycle, and about the biodiversity and compensation, and that's the most complex area. Resources is pretty simple, how much you use with the if you take a proper LCA with that. Okay. And then the big trick why I think we need it for, of course, investors and companies to use it as a reporting framework, but especially SMEs. And I've been demanding that the EU should finance a development in quotes of a nutritional value tablet. We all know that all broccolis are different, but we think that the approximation about the calorie count and potassium count and protein count is adequate for the purpose, so that we can calculate the whole broccoli salad's containment, what the consumer easily can see. And for SMEs, we would need to have this kind of a proxy data space. Okay, I'm using solar panels, equivalent this, the footprint would be that. Okay, I'm using this or that type of the SUV or other transportation. This is the footprint and so forth. Because they are not able otherwise to make these pretty complicated calculations for a long, long time. And this is what I'm worried.
It's a good point, Serpa. I mean, clearly the taxonomy as it currently stands is largely aimed, as per the disclosure regulations, at large investors, corporates, banks. So someone's on an echo there. I'm not quite sure. Thank you. But we need to make this work for everyone. So there is certainly translation activity to go forward, which should be simple. And one of the things about the taxonomy is that whilst it looks complicated, we've actually tried to simplify it in the sense we're coming up with binary clear criteria. So, if you look through, it's a rule set. It's like a shopping list. Yes, I've got to get potatoes, but I need to get organic potatoes. And in this particular case, what are those types of potatoes? Yes, Desiree, what's the name of it again? It's on the list. And that's what we've done here. So we haven't asked people to necessarily calculate scope 3 emissions or whatever. We've actually stripped it down to these are the kinds of activities. Complicated. Sometimes there are emissions methodologies, but whilst it looks complicated, the truth is it's actually simple. If you do a little check, if you're a triple glazed window manufacturer, you will look up, or small or large, and you will find, oh, I'm in, because I just manufactured triple and double glazed windows. Very simple. Yes, there's a couple of caveats, tick, I'm good. Then you can go to the bank and say, look, I comply to taxonomy. I should get a green loan. Exactly right. And I'm sure Karen will help you out with that at Erste Bank. But this is the stuff we have to do. Karen, is that reasonable? Could that work going forward? Is this something Erste is looking at in terms of translating some of these criteria to smaller enterprises as well for preferential loan programs?
Yes. This is exactly what I would love to see and what I'm thinking. And then the basis is this nutritional value tablet, so that you can go and check there, but you can go and do the shopping list and notice that, wow, I didn't know that I was so green.
Karen?
Yes. And this is exactly what we are really doing, going to the client actively and telling him, okay, bring us those data. And I think really also for the small clients, as you state, if it's a small glass manufacturer, it should be easy to explain it to them. I think taxonomy is only really complex on the first glimpse. But if you make this breakdown on a special client, it's not that complex anymore. And we are really eager, and we have some kind of training sessions for our clients, how they can use taxonomy, how they can get taxonomy aligned, and what is the future for them. Because it's so important, also for the small ones. This is one of my critic points, that most of the SMEs are not in the scope of taxonomy for green asset ratio, because the thinking of human beings. Everyone who thinks, oh, I'm happy I'm not under the scope of this regulation, so I have to do nothing. And since a half year or almost 1 year, we're telling our small clients, no, this is not true. You have to do something, because first it's important for our global temperature. So if you haven't realized that at the moment, but it's also important for your business, because you're part of the value chain of a bigger client. And this client will ask you some questions. They will ask you some data, and you have to provide it to them. Not only for us as credit institution, if you need money from us, but also as part of the value chain. It's important to have those data. And if you really focus on only one client, on one activity, it's not that complex anymore.
Nadia, that was a wonderful quote. I'm so happy you said that, Karen, because I think that's true. But the fact you're saying it at a bank, you've been able to do it, is a really important message for everyone on this particular conference to hear. once you get going, if you're focused in an area, if you're a business, it's not that complicated. If you're trying to look at the whole thing, which is really the whole European economy, well, of course it's complicated because the European economy is complicated. So it's perfectly understandable. I'm conscious we're in the wind down period. Nadia, fault lines, issues going forward that we haven't covered so far. Any thoughts?
Yeah, there are a couple of themes I've seen come on Q&A. Maybe I'll touch on some of them. We've got some questions on international taxonomies and sort of a dual reporting burden. So maybe just one quick answer there. So the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which Sirpa mentioned, CSRD in her opener, that's coming into effect from 2025, kind of growing in scale out to 2028. It includes third countries. So if you list on a European regulated market, or even if you're admitted to trading on a European regulated market, and then even if you make 150 million euros from a European legal entity, so some unlisted businesses would be in scope. Based on European sizing, they think it's about 50,000 international companies. In a CSRD will be an obligation to report under a taxonomy, but if you read through the fine print, and that has gone into the official journal, it says if you have a mandatory reporting obligation under a domestic taxonomy, and that domestic taxonomy is considered to be equivalent to the EU, you don't have to report under both. Now the tick box to that is you have a mandatory reporting requirement on your domestic taxonomy. And the other tick box to that is equivalence, which is quite expensive to administer and maintain. And we haven't yet seen a formal body step into who's going to be making sure that equivalence is available. So I think that the comment that Sirpa made on roles of the WEF and others might be really interesting. Similarly, the roles of the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. Whenever I speak on panels, it's the number one question, the interoperability of global taxonomies. It's great that they're coming out. Probably not so great if they're only voluntary, much better that they have some teeth to them. And then if they have some teeth to them, then actually you create some immunity domestically for your companies who don't have this dual reporting burden. So that's important. The other point, Sean, and I think maybe this is a topic for another panel, we've got a lot of questions on SFDR. And I know taxonomy reporting is in SFDR, but more broadly, that's a real usability struggle. And it is actually in the scope of the new platform. So you would have seen it in our usability report, things like do no significant harm is defined in SFDR different to the do no significant harm requirements in the taxonomy. So how can we make those two systems more interoperable? I think I can't answer all these questions you're getting, but I can definitely see this as a thread that maybe CBI could pick up and take forward.
A good point, Nadia. And it is certainly clear that we're not able in this webinar to answer everything. We can't, for example, comment on the new delegated act because we haven't seen it. It hasn't been published yet. And a few people have asked questions along those lines. All we've heard is newspaper rumors. So let's wait and see. But of course, it's meant to be implementation of last year's platform recommendations. So I'm, hopeful that it'll work out. Things get tough in the translation of recommendations to legislation always. So one of the challenges. There are a bunch of objectives that we have heard will not progress this year, such as I mentioned earlier, the social dimension won't progress this year. It's not off the agenda. It's just that there is a bandwidth issue. Everyone here, but what we want to progress this year, what we've got a commitment from the Commission in terms of the mandate for the new platform is usability reform. I'm not going to say to make Karen's life easier, but that would be a part of the impact of it in the sense that we need to ensure widespread take-up happens really quickly and supports capital movement. So if we can ensure we don't lose ambition, but we improve usability, and remember, that is attention, then that we want to do that. We don't have any expectation and idea of changing the nature of ambition going forward. This is a very important point. Why? Because our scientists have told us what it should be. It's not really a matter of political judgment, educated judgment. It's that we have to do this stuff now. And again, look at that IPCC report for a couple of years ago, a couple of days ago to see why this has been driven forward. But good points, Nadia. We'll pick up that. I think we should do that workshop. Let's have a discussion about doing that in the next couple of months. And you'll be key to that one. Bridget, give us a couple of very key points to wrap up now about what we have to do to make this work and what you expect us to do, especially given we have a couple of platform participants on the call, as in Nadia and myself.
And maybe I'm not one of them, so maybe I can step. I can say what I like. I mean, I think at the heart of it is keeping interoperability and global usability really at the core, or at least part of the core, because when the original taxonomy was being created, that was a consideration, but it wasn't really at the core. We now know the impact of the EU taxonomy around the world, and so that should really be a kind of key part of the thinking. That means that we also need to think about, all the criteria that are put forward, that they are usable around the world. And then the last thing is that kind of equivalence and acceptance, that where that we can't find criteria that are usable around the world, that we have ways of accepting what else is going on around the world. I mean, we have clearly, key example of that is in the building space. It's very usable to use your own buildings codes. So we don't want everybody, we can't all use the EU one. So what we need to do is have some kind of acceptance across borders. And equivalence across borders. And I think those are kind of the real key things. And then really maintaining that ambition is the last one. The taxonomy is really about what we must do rather than what we can do. And however the taxonomy is watered down, the EU taxonomy, others will get watered down further. So, really going back to Sirpa's point about science and not politicians, and that really keeping that as the heart, I would say, as some of the key points of the next phase of the EU taxonomy and of their global counterparts, which is being talked about. Thanks.
Can we see progress on common ground taxonomy to more countries and interoperability? Yes. Looking into taxonomies this year?
Yes, so two things to note. So the IPSF, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, has the Common Ground Taxonomy. It came out last year. That will be expanding into the coming year, and you will see more of that over the coming months. It's not going to be next month, but over the coming months, you will see more work to include other jurisdictions, and that's a huge part of interoperability. And then at Client Bonds, we're also working on this to put out tools around interoperability and to kind of help, whether that's on a kind of advice and workshops and all of that side of things, as well as kind of written tools and maybe some IT ones, which I know Sean is very much wanting. So those are some of the things that are going on around interoperability around the world.
A last word, Karin, please, a last reflection.
Last reflection.
Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Is this going to work? You
yes.
said it's going to work. I'm just curious to know the nature of the workload and from where you are now. Is it going to work anyway? And if we make it easier, is it a bonus?
I think, and this is the message I always give to my partners, to my ESG counterparts in the countries, or if anyone is blaming about complexity or whatsoever else, we are at the start, but we have to go on. I think if you start with us a big project, it's always complex, it's always hard. You have to change your thinking, your processes, and so on. And I think Nadia mentioned it in the beginning. Also with the green asset ratio, we have to disclose in our non-financial reports. So for some participants, if they're interested, end of March, our report will be published on, and we have a big chapter on taxonomy disclosure in it. So if you're eager, you can download it from our website. And yes, at the moment, the GAR is very, very low. So it's only, so it's below 10%. But this is because everything starts. We don't have in scope all the activities. We have a lack of ESG data, so we can do the internal assessment for green asset ratio. But every year we will get better on that. And I think what Nadia mentioned, it's the progress. It's all about the progress we can show from one year to another. And if we really take it serious, and I really love the picture, it's a shopping catalog. Taxonomy is really a shopping catalog. Analyze your business environment, what you're operating in, where are the discounters? Where are the low-hanging fruits? What you can shop? What is important for that region? Where there is a gap, where you can step in and shop all the nice articles which are hanging in front of your nose. And I think this is the really don't see the bureaucracy, see the opportunities. And I think then it works.
Nadia, a last word.
Last word.
Serpa, to wrap us up.
I was fervently answering some of the Q&A actually as you
You've been very busy, I've seen.
I was being very busy. Look, I absolutely agree with the optimism of the panelists, and I think Karen particularly has stuck with me that banks want to do this well. It is providing guidance and clarity on how to do that well, and I think for me that really is strongly the remit of the role of Platform 2.0 to guide the Commission in how to make this operable. But I think what we have done thus far, as Bridget rightly points out, has been a lot more incredible than those of us in the TEG ever thought it would be. And so I'm really encouraged by people wanting to do it well, people wanting usability guidance, and we will absolutely kind of meet those needs, and people will find this as a useful tool. And I think it'll make very important changes that Sean, both you and Serpa mentioned at the beginning, like we critically need to pivot to a more sustainable future. And this is such an important tool to help us do that.
Serpa, are we good? Mute. You're on mute.
I do the favor always to people and unmute myself. I think that we are good. I think that we are excellent. And I just would like to join this all-female panel, hoping that we would organize pretty soon a next step of this in discussions, and especially when it goes to CRD and the other reporting initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Bridget, who's dialing in from South Africa today. Thank you, Serpa. Thank you, Nadia. And thank you, everyone, for being part of this session today and all the questions. I'm sorry we haven't answered all the questions. Our panelists have been very busy, as you can see. We'll try and come back to you with ones that we can still deal with by email. But there's a job to be done, which is to shift our economies, to shift our societies to a different path, a low carbon, a resilient pathway to survive the climate instance we're going to have anyway. And the taxonomy is clearly got a key role in doing that. It is a shopping list, what we need to do. It doesn't solve the problem of what we need to do. We still have to deal with that. There's policy, there's regulation, there's finance, but at least it's a start and it gets rid of the debate and argument on the edges. For that, we have a lot to be thankful for. But as you can see, there's work to be done. Good luck in the meantime, changing our planet for the better, creating a future for our children. That's the job of all of us. Thank you for joining me. The recording will be available in the very near future. Thanks, everyone.